Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on what part of this beautiful country that you're in. Welcome to the Rebel Roundup. It's our weekly show wherein we talk about the news of the week, completely unscripted, and we invite you to participate in the show with us. You can do that in a couple of different ways. If you're watching us streaming on YouTube right now, thank you for sticking out with us on that platform. It is a censorship platform where you cannot speak your mind, leave the comments that you want to, or even report the news as accurately as you would like. But thank you for being there. There are 1.3 million sets of eyeballs over there. We don't want to abandon you. So we do stream there. But if you want the full uncensored version of Rebel News, might I suggest you wander on over to Rumble or Odyssey, two platforms that really don't care about your politics. They just want you to consume what you want to consume when you want to consume it. So we're streaming on Rumble. We're also streaming on Odyssey. On both of those platforms, you can support the work that we do completely willingly by leaving a paid chat. On Rumble, it's called a Rumble Rant. On Odyssey, it's called a Hyper Chat. If you leave a chat over the $5 US minimum, I'm obligating myself to read it on air, so speak your mind. But don't let that be the bar for entry. For example, we frequently read chats that come in under that dollar amount, and sometimes we even read the free ones if they're interesting. So get chatting with each other, get chatting with us, and we'll get directly into the news of the day. And the news of the day is really the news of yesterday. The third such protest of these pro-Hamas protesters took place at a synagogue in Thornhill yesterday. And violence broke out. Police seemed to be standing by doing absolutely nothing. We had Rebel News journalists on the scene. We had Rebel News journalists assaulted. And the reason this is all going on is because there's a real estate presentation happening at this. I think it's an Orthodox synagogue, but it's a real estate presentation about buying land in Israel. And apparently, according to these pro-Hamas, pro-terror apologist types, that's completely unacceptable. And so they've protested at this synagogue 3 times. And a real genuine melee broke out yesterday. Let's go to some of these clips. We've got the first one is anti-Israel protesters. And I wouldn't even call them anti-Israel. I would call them anti-Semitic because they're protesting at a synagogue in the GTA. That's not anti-Israel. That's anti-Semitic. That's anti-Jewish. But these protesters stomp on the Jewish flag, and then, according to the description here, chaos just pops right off while the crowd crosses on to the synagogue, and it's in Thornhill. So let's show this. And pay attention to what the cops are doing here. Spoiler alert, it's mostly nothing.
You kill children! You kill children! On the sidewalk! Off their property! Get on the sidewalk! Get on the sidewalk! Off their property!
as you watch this, because you see the people with the yellow jackets on, the yellow vests, and your mind thinks that they're police. But really, maybe only a third of the people you see in the yellow vests are actually police. And the police aren't keeping anybody really apart until they start shoving. I mean, this is crazy. If you're a Jew in Toronto, you're on your own. I mean, if you're a Jew in Canada at this point, you're on your own. But this is outrageous. And this is the third protest of its kind at this synagogue. Why wasn't the police presence a little greater? I mean, if these people were honking their horn for freedom, the police would be all over them like white on rice. But 3 protests can occur at this synagogue, and you've got a handful of police there doing next to nothing. Let's go into the next video, because we had Rebel News journalists there covering this. And as you can see, they're covering this at great risk to their own safety, but that's what it takes to get the news. The next video is titled Flag Thief. Apparently, the Star of David is so triggering to these people that they'll just take your flag, snatch your flag, tear it up, stomp on it. I'm surprised they didn't burn any. This one, a Hamas supporter steals an Israeli flag during a tense moment as pro-Israel and pro-Hamas rallies are held in Thornhill. And again, this is at a synagogue. Like, imagine if this was happening at a mosque. If Christians opposed to Islamification had gone to a mosque and protested. And let's go back a second. The reason they're protesting is these pro-Hamas radicals are mortified at the thought that Jews might live in a neighborhood, a new development in Israel, their ancestral and indigenous homeland. That's why they're rioting in front of a synagogue in Toronto. And they tell me they're not anti-Semitic. Anyways, let's roll this next clip.
Oh my God. Oh my God, they're going right into the school property. They stole my flag. They're all trespassing on the synagogue property. Police are useless. They were trespassing on the synagogue property. They went. They're like roughing everyone up. Police didn't do anything. Hey, how you doing?
This is wild. Why didn't more police show up? This went on for hours. Hours. Violence, vandalism, trespass. Why didn't more cops show up? They should have been treating this the same way they treated an illegal barbecue restaurant. You know, they sent in, as David Menzies says, all the king's horses and all the king's men. When Adam Skelly opened his barbecue restaurant to serve customers that wanted to be there, just up the road from a Costco, by the way, that was wide open and serving food. Why aren't they treating this as much of a public safety menace as they did an illegal barbecue restaurant in Toronto? Boy, it sure shows you the police's priorities there. And I mean, this comes down from the top. You know, the politicians, they let this go on. And even the conservative ones, by the way. This is the third protest at this synagogue. Where are all the pro-Israel, or at least anti-terrorism MPs, MPPs, city councillors? They should have been down there showing solidarity with this synagogue, but they're not. Why not? And I know there's some good ones. Melissa Landsman, where are you? Go down there and show support. Next video, more scuffles between pro-Israel and pro-Hamas crowds. And the police finally think that it's time to separate the two. So let's show this. Let's see the police finally springing into action.
Holy shit, you're so ugly! Oh my god, my eyes hurt! My eyes hurt, you're so ugly, bro! What are you saying, you fucking illegal son? I cannot show you my beautiful face. It will literally stain it. Allahu Akbar, bro. You're so ugly. Take your fucking ugly right out of my face. Let's
That's crazy. It's crazy. How did the police let them get so close? Look at the street. It's just full of protesters from either side, and they've got a handful of police doing next to nothing. This is crazy. People have a right to protest, but protesting at a place of worship, there's something fundamentally unpalatable about it, particularly if your protest has nothing to do with anything legitimate. Like, this is just good old, age-old, as old as time, nothing new under the sun anti-Semitism. This has nothing to do with Israel. If it were, they wouldn't be protesting at a synagogue in the Greater Toronto area. And yet, where are our politicians? There are a handful of them weighing in against it. But then there's Justin Trudeau. He only weighs in to denounce these sorts of things when it's inconvenient. We've got a clip from Justin Trudeau. He's apparently reacting to the fact that his meeting with Italy's very conservative prime minister was canceled thanks to these pro-Hamas protesters. I bet he was actually quite relieved that that he didn't have to meet with a conservative woman that he couldn't boss around. It was probably just, he's probably thanking his lucky stars that the pro-Hamas protesters turned up at that meeting. But let's hear what he has to say. Is it going to be a strong denunciation of anti-Semitic mobs on the streets of Canada's most populous city, or something more Trudeaupian? Let's listen.
Can you comment about some of the protests that we've been seeing across the country in relation to the Israel-Hamas war, but particularly in Toronto? I mean, you had experience with this last weekend where your event was cancelled, and a lot of people were upset about that, upset how they've been, Toronto Police has talked about the hostility and confrontation between police and protesters now. What specifically is your government, if anything, going to do about this, or are these protests just allowed to happen in our country because it's a free country?
Well, first of all, nobody can remain indifferent to the suffering and the anguish going on in Gaza right now, this loss of civilian lives and the impact on Canadian families and people who are worried about their loved ones is entirely understandable. Canadians have a right to protest, absolutely, to make their anguish, their anger heard by other Canadians. That's important, and we will always protect that right. But when the protests turn to hatred or to acts of harassment, particularly against fellow Canadians, there's a line that's crossed. I've heard from too many members of the Jewish community particularly who are seeing their synagogues, their community centers, their neighborhoods protested, who feel unsafe in their own country. I know Canadians have very strong feelings about this conflict, and rightly so. There are horrible things that we're seeing. But it is not who we are to take it out on our fellow Canadians. Absolutely, there are things to be outraged about, things that people need to continue to protest about. But hateful or harassing behavior, particularly against neighbors, is not what we do here in Canada. And as that happens, or when that happens, I expect Canadians, including our police authorities, to act within the rules and within the law of making sure that everyone can always feel safe everywhere in this country.
Okay, so we've got crypto-Nazi hate mobs running loose on the streets of Canada's most populous city. They are trespassing and vandalizing on the front lawns of synagogues. And Justin Trudeau's like, I understand that everybody's upset about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Do you think a single one of those people is actually genuinely concerned about what's going on in Gaza? I really don't. This is just their opportunity to be anti-Semitic. This gives them license to let their little crypto-Nazi inside be their, I guess, Nazi outside. It is really interesting how Justin Trudeau suddenly cares about the rights of people to protest. He's the guy who invoked the Emergencies Act unlawfully, might I add, on a peaceful demonstration, a multicultural demonstration across all socioeconomic class levels in the nation's capital. They had a right to protest too. They certainly weren't protesting and snatching flags away from Jewish Canadians. They weren't protesting at synagogues, although Justin Trudeau was more than happy to call them fascists and call them hateful and call them fringe radicals. We now have real mobs of fringe radicals on the streets of Canada, and Justin Trudeau is basically saying, well, you know, everybody, we can understand. Once again, he can understand why people are doing these things in the same way that he could understand how people were burning churches and vandalizing Christian places of worship for an entire summer after he whipped up a rage mob against Christians. Same thing. He can empathize. He can understand. But basically, could you tone it down a little because you're getting my meetings canceled? What a joke. There's absolutely no leadership in any of that. And as my friend David Menzies pointed out in the morning meeting that we have, if the script were flipped here, Trudeau would be down there standing in solidarity. What I mean is, remember the hijab hoax from a few years ago? A little Muslim girl said that an Asian man snipped at her hijab with some scissors as he was walking down the street. It was a hoax. None of it was real. But Justin Trudeau took to Twitter to denounce it, say he stood in solidarity with the girl. Like, it was wild, the amount of support that the Liberals provided to the Muslim community, and it was all fake. None of it was real. And yet, Justin Trudeau, a normal prime minister, would be there down at the Thornhill synagogue. And he's not, because he's not a normal prime minister. He's not even a normal man. Deeply broken individual. Staying on raging anti-Semitism of the left, BC NDP MLA. Now, this doesn't surprise me. The NDP are very anti-Semitic. I think it's Nikki Ashton, federal NDP MP. She marches in the Nakba Day protest. Now, Nakba means catastrophe, and the catastrophe day for her and her side is the founding of the state of Israel. They call it a catastrophe. So she marches in those parades. Another hate march. So now we've got Selena Robinson. This story is by my friend Dre Humphrey. Selena Robinson, NDP MLA in BC, resigned and absolutely scorched the party on the way out the door because of the anti-Semitic hypocrisy in the BC NDP's inclusivity mandate. She said that she has been subject to extreme anti-Semitism, not just now, but also before. But she says at least before they apologized, but now they're just no longer apologizing. It's just something that they can do just because. She used to be in cabinet. She was the post-secondary education minister, and pro-Palestinian groups pressured her after she said basically modern Israel was founded on a crappy piece of land and it was turned into this life in the desert, this blooming, thriving place in the desert where, you know, people defend their land, live, grow. And anyways, people found that, I don't know, somehow racist. And so her party turned against her. She was basically removed from cabinet. She was forced to apologize in a NDP struggle session, as it were. And she penned a letter, published the letter, and let's read a little bit of it if I might be able to get close to my screen. I don't have my glasses on, so you guys are all going to watch me struggle. She says, shortly after, no, let's go back. First one, my colleagues. This is directly to her colleagues. You broke my heart, not just on February 5th when the Premier told me that after the caucus talked about me, he did not see a way back. The folks were wondering why I hadn't already resigned and that the only path forward was resignation. Resigning was not my choice, but I told the Premier that if this is what he wanted and what caucus wanted, I wouldn't fight him on it. But let's be clear. Others asked about my resignation, so I gave it. You actually broke my heart in the days after October 7th, the day terrorists went into Israel and brutally murdered, slaughtered, raped, mutilated, killed, and kidnapped 120 civilians. The terrorists didn't target the military. They targeted children, concert goers, grandmothers, peace activists, and a young British Columbian named Ben Mizrahi. The Jewish community was in shock. We are about 40,000 here in British Columbia, and we were reeling. She goes on to say, within days after the massacre, she said, we just witnessed the slaughter, rape, mutilation, and murder of 1,200 mostly Jews. We watched as the terrorists celebrated this horrific act. Ben Mizrahi hadn't been murdered yet. The IDF hadn't yet taken any action. The world was stunned, and two of my colleagues wanted to move quickly past what had happened and refocus government on a geopolitical conflict that has been going on for years. But it wasn't their anti-Semitism that broke my heart. It was your silence to their anti-Semitism that hurt the most. Not a single one of you responded to their insensitive, disrespectful, and inappropriate email. Your silence broke my heart that day. You abandoned me and my community that day. What she said was she sent a group email and put out the call for NDP MLAs to join her in denouncing what happened in Israel on October 7th when marauding terrorists came largely from Gaza and murdered 120 civilians, largely civilians, and then kidnapped 240 others, mostly women and children. And basically she said, I had hoped you'd stand in solidarity with me, but it was worse because they basically all but sided with Hamas. And so she's resigned, and she's got, we've got a video of her responding after her resignation. And let's all remember, this is a Jewish woman in the NDP. So she's a left-wing Jew. And even that is not enough for these pro-Hamas interlopers of the left.
Given the fact that there's a double standard that exists within the Democrat caucus around if someone makes comments that are hurtful to a particular group, that there isn't a balance of response. There have been numerous colleagues of mine, intentionally or unintentionally, who have said anti-Semitic things. The Jewish community heard apologies from them, that they were accepted, and things carried on. That hasn't been the case, certainly in my case, and that certainly has been very hurtful, and the Jewish community is pretty outraged by it.
How much reflection, Selena, did this take?
Well, it's been a month of I would say crying every day. Not for me, but for the voice that I brought to caucus, the voice that I brought to the cabinet table, the work that I did for two premiers who asked me specifically to engage with the Jewish community, to help the Jewish community see New Democrats as a party that they could count on. But that hasn't been the case for the last 5 months. And that's been really hard. I've been the lone voice addressing the fear that students are feeling on campus. The fact that a Jewish physician has cited a workplace that is unsafe and he's had to quit, and 288 Jewish physicians are not interested in training UBC medical students. The fact that I have heard from people working in the public service that they feel uncomfortable because people in the public service have included a Palestinian flag in their signatures. All of this has made Jewish people feel unsafe, and I have shared all of this with the Premier's office over the last 5 months, and I continue to be the only one who is saying we have to do something differently. It's not going away. People shouldn't be afraid here in British Columbia.
What's the essence of why you made this decision?
I can't continue to be the only voice speaking up against anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. And so, and not being, at the cabinet table and bringing that voice, I think is a real risk. And not sitting with as a New Democrat, being an independent, I feel like I can use that voice in a different way.
Do you see what they did there to her? They basically used her to round up votes from the Jewish community and then told her to shut up when she advocated for the Jewish community. And so now she's basically out of principle, burning down her own political career. She's going to sit as an independent, and then she said the next time around she's not going to run. So good for her. There are still some principled New Democrats out there. I guess they're in BC. They certainly aren't in Alberta. But it also makes you wonder, right? There's this one woman of the left standing up for her community, and yet not a single Liberal MP, particularly the Jewish ones, Andrew Housefather, I'm looking at you, none of them have resigned from Trudeau's caucus. Not just over the anti-Semitic hate mobs he seems to closely empathize with running amok in Canadian cities, but all the other scandals too. Like, nobody has resigned over a Rive scam, the Winnipeg lab leak, with just Chinese scientists leaving the lab with pockets full of Ebola. Like, nobody's resigning over any of this. The illegal invocation of the Emergencies Act, which I think was the single largest civil liberties violation of modern Canadian history. Nobody's resigning over any of that. The out-of-control spending, missing the budgetary spending by, I think, 16%. It's a lot of billions. Not a single Liberal MP has resigned. There's not even rumblings that they want Trudeau to resign. They're just going to ride this thing right to the bottom. If that were in Alberta, we'd be getting rid of the guy in charge. We did that to Jason Kenney, and we weren't in fear of losing the next election. They're in big trouble in the next election, these Liberals are, and they're not even trying to right the ship. And I think it's because many of them know, like many of them who had leadership designs, they know they allowed themselves now to become too tainted, and there's no path forward for them either. You know, like the people who would be presumed replacements for Justin Trudeau. Chrystia Freeland, for example. She's too tainted by all of this. that she's covered in the stink of Justin Trudeau. She could never lead the party. Well, she might be able to lead the party, but she'll never be the prime minister she desires to be. Who else is there? Mark Holland? Like, no, there's nobody else. And so they're going to have to try to get somebody from without the party instead of within, if and when they ever get sick of Justin Trudeau's scandals. I think we're halfway through the show now. I know we have an ad break. Let's hit that right now, and they'll come right back, because there's some news that happened over the last week that I think is significant, that we should talk about. It's a little bit old news, but there's some things in there that nobody else is talking about that I think we should. So let's go to that.
Folks, it's undeniable that our rights and freedoms are under attack. But how can we know what rights we're losing if we don't even know what rights we already have?
It's Freedom Passport's mission to educate people about their rights and freedoms.
The Freedom Passport is an easy-to-read, pocket-sized booklet containing the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's a portable token of your inalienable rights.
There's an app, too. Easily access the Freedom Passport on your phone and compare rights and freedoms from around the world for only $3.99.
Join our global community of individuals who are passionate about understanding their rights and freedoms.
Visit freedompassport.ca and get your Freedom Passport today.
Do you not want to hear the other side of the story?
All right, that's super exciting. I'm really excited for Rebel Live. I love to get out and mix and mingle with our friends and supporters, and I'm really excited that April Hutchinson is confirmed for Rebel Live. That is coming up in Toronto. I know that we're planning for another part of the country, but I'm just so thrilled that April Hutchinson is already confirmed, and we're working to confirm more speakers over the coming days. So keep checking back at rebelnewslive.com. That's May 11th in the greater GTA. So coming up very quick, and these things always sell out. So if you are considering getting tickets, you know the lineup is always great. We've got Tamara Leach coming and Billboard Chris also. Billboard Chris spoke at our last Rebel Live event, and he was such a hit. Tamara Leach, always a hit. Always great. We've got Amanda Achtman there too, somebody that I follow very, very closely. You may not know her, but she is one of the leading activists against medical assistance in dying in this country. And most of what we know about what doctors are doing and not doing comes from Amanda and her activism and research. So she's just a wealth of knowledge, and we've come to know her a little bit more closely. Myself, I mean, she's been a friend of the Rebel for a while, but on our work on the medical assistance in dying documentary that Kian, Simone, and I are working on. So anyway, all that is to say, if you are thinking, even considering getting tickets, get them, because they will be gone and you will miss out and you will be very upset, and you will likely try to email me and say, Sheila, I'm a longtime viewer of the Rebel. You know me. I'm a subscriber and a friend and a donor and just a real Rebel booster. Can you get me in? And I will have to say no, and it will deeply, deeply hurt me, because I don't want to turn anybody away, but we just don't have chairs. Like, we won't have chairs and we won't have room for you. So tell your friends and tell your family, bring your kids. It's a full day affair. It starts early, goes late, and you will get a lot out of it. I always do. And so I can't wait to see you there. And it's rebelnewslive.com. Oh, and also, by the way, I should say, if you want a captive audience of people who are interested in freedom-minded organizations, businesses, groups, reach out to Alex on our team here. Maybe you can throw Alex's email up there. Again, it was on the Rebel News Live page for sponsorship details. There it is. So ads at rebelnews.com. That's my friend Alex. He's on the other end of that email for sponsorship opportunities. And you have to remember, Rebel friends and allies, they let their dollars do the talking. They already are forced to support the mainstream media thanks to Justin Trudeau's perpetual bailouts of their failing industry. But they choose to support Rebel News out of the goodness of their heart because they believe in freedom and free speech and telling the other side of the story. So wouldn't you love to talk to those people if you have a great freedom-minded organization? I would. So reach out to my friend Alex at ads@rebelnews.com if you're interested in sponsoring our event. All right, let's go into this next story that I thought was quite interesting. And the reason I thought it was quite interesting is because it's not all that interesting that Jamil Javani, longtime conservative activist, if you've been around the conservative ecosphere, you know that name, writes sometimes in post media, sort of True North adjacent sometimes. He is a very freedom-minded conservative. I think he was Pierre Poilievre's hand-selected pick for the Durham riding. And it's no surprise that he won the Durham riding. That is a conservative stronghold. He was running in Aaron O'Toole's old riding, who sort of took his books and went home after he lost the conservative leadership to Pierre Poilievre. So Jamil Javani, he is an ethnic minority, young man, someone the Liberals would definitely court if they could, but he's a conservative and a smart guy. And here's what I find most interesting. Jamil Javani, he is sort of the new crop of pro-freedom, very blue Tories, none of this like purple or red Tory business, pro-freedom, pro-free speech, anti-mandates. He's been critical of critical race theory, sort of pro-parents' rights. And he took O'Toole's seat, I think, by 11% higher than O'Toole did. So O'Toole was a shoo-in there. He won his seat with 46% of the vote in the 2021 snap election that Justin Trudeau called in the middle of the pandemic for very suspicious reasons. But Javani got 57% of the vote. I love that he's holding up a wrestling-style belt. And he got 11% more than Noodles and Butter O'Toole. And the Liberals threw everything they could at him and the kitchen sink. The Trudeau Liberals were campaigning in that riding hard. I think they sent every single cabinet minister into the riding to knock doors. I think Justin Trudeau was there at least once because they didn't want it to be a blowout. Well, it was a blowout and then some. And so that is a lesson, I think, for Aaron O'Toole style conservatives, that if you are bold and aggressive and unashamed in your conservatism, you will win. If you offer an alternative to the Liberals, instead of just being like Liberals in blue ties, you'll do well. That's what happened here in Alberta too. But it's also a message to the Liberals. I think this is a harbinger of the next election, that it is going to be even more punishing for the Liberals than they think it's going to be, because they couldn't even narrow the gap in Durham if they tried, and they did. They did everything they could. So, good. That's really not what they're talking about in the mainstream media on Giovanni's win, right? Like, they're talking about, it was no surprise. It was conservative riding. It was Aaron O'Toole's riding, former leaders. So, of course, it was a safe seat for the Conservatives. That is true. But the 11-point improvement over the last time round, that says something to both the Liberals, but the noodles and butter vegetable lasagna version of the Tories that I hope have been relegated to the sidelines now that Pierre Poilievre's in town. Let's keep going. Now, Jamil Jivani, I'm hopeful about his brand of conservatism because he pulls no punches with anybody, including someone he used to work for, and that is Premier Doug Ford. So Giovanni used to do some work for the Ontario Tories, and then he became a critic of Rob Ford, as many conservative types have become, including myself. I thought he would be more like his brother. Instead, he's more like Justin Trudeau. But somebody had the temerity, as my friend David Menzies says, to ask Doug Ford about what could be possible tensions between the federal Conservatives now that one of his critics is occupying the seat in Durham. So let's hear from Doug Ford.
Jamil Jivani won Durham for the federal Conservatives earlier this week. He was an advisor to your government a few years ago. In his victory speech, he said Liberal elites are betraying the working people of this country, including the Liberal elites who run the Ontario Ministry of Education in this province, implying Minister Lecce. What's your response to this, and are you worried about federal Conservatives railing against your ministers like this?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Jamil. I gave that young man an opportunity. He showed up. No one even knew who he was. Came in my office. I gave him an incredible opportunity. To be very frank, you go to root cause, he wouldn't even be where he is if I didn't give him that opportunity. So I just want to wish Jamil all the best. He should focus on maybe the carbon tax. Maybe he should come in. I'll give him a couple lessons on how to speak to his constituents and that. But he should really focus money, putting money back into their pockets, and focus on the carbon tax. We're doing great for the people of Ontario. We're going to do great for his riding that he's going to represent. I want to wish him all the best, and hopefully he wins that riding.
You know the gall of that guy. I just, Jamil Jivani busted his butt in that riding. He's a former broadcaster. So there's this collection, an encyclopedia of what he thinks about certain issues. He's written about them. He's spoken about them. He's a longtime conservative activist. Jamil Jivani has helped other people get elected. He helped Doug Ford's government until there's no helping Doug Ford's government. And I appreciate that Jamil Jivani is honest in his criticism of Doug Ford and Stephen Lecce, a man who deserves a lot of criticism because on the outside looking in, I look and see absolute mayhem in the Ontario education system. You've got these teachers with fake boobs running around and all manner of nonsense. It was, a year of protesting what's going on in the curriculum in Ontario schools, and Lecce was completely absent. We've got dysfunctional school boards like that one and the Ottawa Carleton District School Board with Neely Kaplan-Worth. It's just insane, and he is completely asleep at the switch. So yeah, it's a fair criticism from Jamil Jivani. What Doug Ford doesn't like is that it is honest criticism. You can't write it off as, it's a Liberal saying that, so it is their job to oppose what the Conservatives do. Or that's from the mainstream media, and you know how they don't like us conservatives. You can write off conservative or criticism coming from those directions as a conservative politician. You can't write it off when it's coming from someone who used to work for you, who didn't change teams. He is now the MP in Durham. So it's hard to say that Jamil Javani's criticism of Doug Ford is dishonest or politically motivated from a progressive viewpoint. So that probably very much stung Doug Ford, and he deserves it. But then to also say, I made him? Who the hell are you to take credit for the work that young man did to get himself elected? I say young man, he's 36, but I'm older. But yeah, like, what are you doing taking credit for his work? He did that. He doesn't need any lessons from Doug Ford about how to speak to his constituents. I'll be surprised if Doug Ford wins the next election. I will. I'll be shocked. And if he does somehow, by the skin of his teeth, pull it off, it'll be thanks to help from the federal Conservative Party that will deploy their infrastructure and their volunteers and their MPs like Jamil Javani to help pull it out of the fire for Doug Ford. So he should maybe shut his yap and listen a little bit. Let's go into this next video of Doug Ford. Doug Ford said that Jamil Javani should do some work pushing back on the carbon tax. But he bends the ear of Justin Trudeau more than any other conservative politician I can name, right? He calls Justin Trudeau his friend. What's he tangibly doing to push back? I know what Saskatchewan's doing. I know what Alberta's doing. What's Doug Ford doing? Anything? I'm not sure. Maybe someone can tell me in a chat what Doug Ford has done to push back against the carbon tax. But anyways, he was asked by a journalist what he thinks about Scott Moe, the maverick of the prairies right now, withholding or not withholding, but not even collecting the carbon tax on home heating in Saskatchewan in an attempt to exact fairness for the people of Saskatchewan now that Atlantic provinces have an exemption from the carbon tax on home heating oil. And of course, Stephen Guilbeault has said that it's immoral to withhold the carbon tax from him because then he will withhold the carbon tax rebate from the people of Saskatchewan. Why would he do that? I don't know, for spite, because he's still giving the carbon tax rebate to the people in Atlantic Canada who are no longer paying carbon tax on their home heating. So anyway, let's show Doug Ford's response to Scott Moe's fight with the feds.
I'm wondering if Ontario would entertain doing something similar to what Saskatchewan is doing, not collecting or passing on the carbon tax collected on home heating.
Well, we can't do that. They own the utility, so they can do it. We can't, because our utility suppliers are private. We do have shares in obviously Hydro One, but Enbridge and other utility companies are private, so we can't do it. But good luck to my friend Scott Moe. You know, the carbon tax is the worst tax you could ever put on the backs of people, and I can't believe the federal government is actually going to hike the gas tax by 23%. Like, what don't you get? I've told them over and over again, the number one issue with people is affordability, affordable homes, affordable groceries, and affordable gas. And what drives up the inflation is energy cost. When you're gouging people at the pumps, they're already taking, 17.5 cents compared to where we reduced it by 10.7 cents. Guys, wake up, smell the coffee. Like, what don't you understand? Cancel this carbon tax, put it on hold, do whatever, and if you don't, the people of Canada are going to annihilate you when the election comes up. Simple as that.
Oh, but Doug, there's lots that you can do instead of just hanging Scott Moe out to fight this on his own. For example, you could, while he's complaining about the gas tax, I know the substantial portion of the gas tax is collected by the province. You can continue to extend your 5.7 cents a liter tax cut. You could even make it greater than that. Surely you could do that. That's what we do here in Alberta. You could also do what Alberta's doing as well. Why don't you sit down with Danielle Smith as frequently as you sit down with your friend Justin Trudeau, because he's always your friend when he's giving you a bunch of money to give to electric vehicle battery manufacturers in Ontario. He's always a friend then. Why don't you do what Alberta's doing? For example, in Alberta, back in November, we laid the groundwork, our provincial government laid the groundwork to create a crown corporation. Look, I'm not one to advocate for crown corporations. I think every job that the government does, or every company that the government owns, is an entrepreneurial opportunity snatched from a regular citizen who could do it far more profitable than any level of government can. But Alberta, likewise, with Ontario, we have a privatized energy retail system. So what our premier said is that we cannot ask our energy retailers to break the law and not collect and thus not remit the carbon tax to the feds. But what we can do is create a crown corporation that will be basically a holding company, so that crown corporation will either buy the energy from the retailer or cycle the energy through the crown corporation, so that we're not expecting in Alberta our energy retailers and distributors to break the federal law. So there are ways you could get creative if you wanted to, but then you won't get all that money from the feds for electric vehicle batteries and to build electric vehicles in Ontario. So Doug Ford, he does a lot of talking about out both sides of his mouth. Let's go into this story that just broke this morning. I wrote it up before I ran into the studio, and it is from Montreal, a story that it might be on the website now. I'm not sure. You might be able to find it there. But I wrote the story up before I ran in. But it comes out of Montreal. Here it is. Montreal Catholic Diocese loses court challenge to block assisted suicide in a palliative care home. The Archbishop Christian Lapine filed a challenge back in February to prevent a church-affiliated palliative care facility, St. Raphael's, from being forced to allow medical assistance in dying to their patients. So thank you for scrolling down. I don't have this on my screen quite yet. No, just scroll up and we'll read through it together. Yeah, there it is. So Justice Catherine Piche ruled that Quebecers' right to choose what medical care they want to receive outweighs any infringement on religious freedom. We read through that. He said, I know it's a complicated issue and there are many points of view, but I feel that in a democracy and with the Charter of Rights that we have, it should be allowed to respect the freedom of conscience, which is very important. The lawsuit sought an exemption for St. Raphael's from the new MAID law in Quebec, which is one of the most oppressive in the country. It took place in December 2023. All palliative care homes in Quebec must offer MAID without exception. And so the diocese argued the law meant a choice between ceasing support for St. Raphael's, which provides end-of-life care instead of death care, or that they must accept that their property, St. Raphael's, is a former church, which makes this even a worse pill to swallow, be used to commit acts they consider morally unacceptable. And for those people who don't know, Catholic doctrine states that life begins at conception and ends at natural death. Now, that means that no interventions can be done to expedite the natural death. Now, you might say that, we've done everything that we can do and we're not going to take any more extraordinary steps. That is not against Catholic doctrine. It's when doctors or nurse practitioners or pharmacists intervene to expedite the end of life that is against our religion. And so, according to the Quebec Superior Court, Justice Catherine Piche, it is perfectly acceptable to force Catholics to participate in something that fundamentally, according to Catholics like myself, jeopardizes our mortal soul, which is a terrible thing to do. And if I had to guess, St. Raphael's will likely close instead of participating in medical assistance in dying, which will mean that there will be fewer palliative care beds for people at their end of life, which is atrocious. But we see this sort of stuff happening all over the country. This is very similar to what happened in British Columbia with the Delta Hospice Society. The province basically nationalized the Delta Hospice Society's 10-bed hospice. It's a brand new multi-million-dollar facility built with funds raised by congregants, basically of the Catholic Church. It was largely a Catholic facility. And they built this beautiful new facility. And it wasn't just a 10-bed hospice. It also had assistance for people who are learning to live with cancer or learning to live with life after cancer and their family. So an essential service, really, to anybody who's trying to navigate the healthcare system in and around cancer and oncology. And they said, we will not allow medical homicide to take place in our facility. We provide natural end-of-life care. We will do everything we can to make sure people are comfortable and dignified, and that wasn't good enough for the province. They took their facility, just took it, didn't compensate them or anything, renamed it, and now they get to kill people there. And there's another example of this happening in the Greater Vancouver area, I think it's St. Paul's Hospital, Catholic-run hospital again. And so they said, we won't allow medical assistance in dying in our hospital. This violates our religion. And, when you have good and faithful Catholics funding these facilities, we don't want our money going to kill people. Of course not. So what happened was they basically built a walkway in between St. Paul's and this, I guess, death chamber for people's grandparents and sickly. And so that's the government's solution, is that they couldn't force St. Paul's and they couldn't exactly expropriate St. Paul's like they did with the Delta Hospice Society, but they made it real easy to cart your grandparents from St. Paul's to the death chamber next door. It's awful. It's awful. Why do they have to do this? There are so many facilities that aren't religious in nature, that aren't funded by good and faithful Catholics. Go to those facilities. They'll help you. Or maybe they won't. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they don't give the quality of care that these Catholic facilities do because they don't view your life the same way that the Catholic facilities do. But nobody ever gets that through their head. They treat you with dignity and care because you are created in the image of the divine until such time as you say that's not good enough. They have this desire to do this to Catholic churches. They do it to Catholic schools. Instead of just going to the place that suits your needs, they have to make sure that everything is this cookie cutter version of the failed thing that everything else is. Speaking of failed things, let's go into this next story. One of the biggest stories of the week here in Canada was that Luka Magnotta is in a medium security facility, the same medium security facility as Canadian serial killer Paul Bernardo is in, where they have a tennis court and an outdoor hockey rink. It's club fed, as they say. But buried in all of that, it should have been outrageous. If you've seen the documentary Don't F with Cats on Netflix, you should. our friend Joe Warmington is in there. And basically it breaks down how Luka Magnotta was caught, and a lot of it had to do with amateur internet sleuths. But what really is the story here is that if I had to guess, Luka Magnotta is going to be in a women's prison in about 18 months, because Luka Magnotta, who was a gay escort hustler type when he killed Junlin. I'm so sorry that I very nearly screwed up the name of his victim. He was a gay male escort type when he killed Junlin, a Chinese, I think, chemical engineering student, and cut up his body, filmed the whole affair, and then mailed the body parts to a couple of schools and the heads of political parties, including the Conservatives. I think a Conservative staffer actually had the mispleasure of opening one of the boxes. So now he's in prison, and he has suddenly decided, as these violent men tend to do, that wouldn't life be easier in a women's prison? So he's making his way there. Currently, he's in medium security. He's identifying as trans. He's going by the name Violet. And he is gay married to another prisoner, and they are just living their best married life in the medium security prison with Paul Bernardo playing ball hockey and pickleball, if I had to guess. And the thing that really astounded me in all that reporting, because Michelle Mandel of the Toronto Sun did some incredible work on this story. She was able to get her hands on the documents, is that the researchers from McGill University who were interviewing Luka Magnotta flat out admit he's malingering. He's faking. They said he is not trans. He shows up to these interviews where he claims to be trans, looking like a dude, sounding like a dude, in his personal affect, in his presentation, in his clothing, everything. They say there's no incongruity between in between his gender and his sex. And that's supposed to be how normal people know there's no difference between gender and sex. But they basically said that this is just his need to periodically reinvent himself. And he's doing this to protect himself from other inmates. And the doctors noted that Magnotta basically is faking. He's using phrases he repeats as if rehearsed to describe his gender journey. Now, Michelle Mandel, to her credit, uses his. But over and over and over, these doctors who admit openly he's faking continue to use his preferred pronouns. They call him she, her, over and over again, Violet, even though they are saying he's doing this to get preferential, easier treatment in prison. He's going to ride this all the way into a women's prison because he says, yes, I'm definitely going to have bottom surgery. And then you don't even have to have bottom surgery to get into the women's prison. You just get to identify. And so I think that's where he's headed, if I had to guess. And look, I don't make the rules. Justin Trudeau does. So I think that's it. I think that's where he's going. It's wild. It's crazy. It's crazy. But this is Justin Trudeau's Canada. And you can be, I think he was probably a serial killer caught on the first kill because he's just obnoxious and had to keep posting videos of himself and photos of himself and wanted the world to be talking about him, which is why he got caught on the first kill. Because nobody just goes straight to cutting people up the way he did. But he did. And so this is like a one-kill serial killer. And he knows what to do. He knows how to game the system. I think we are at the end of the show, and I know we need the studio for other things, so I'm going to do my best to wrap it up here. Let's maybe just talk no, you know what? Never mind. Let's go. Did we get to everything in the title? I think we should talk about the Chinese groups really fast. Okay, let's go into this story super duper fast. It is, do you remember the Chinese police stations that were all over the place? Still are. You could go check them out if you wanted to in the greater GTA. But right now, 2 Montreal area Chinese groups who were accused of hosting these clandestine Chinese government, quote, police stations are suing the RCMP for defamation. Earlier this week, the Chinese Family Services of Greater Montreal, boy, they sure give these guys the right names. The Centre Sino-Quebec de la Rive Sud, I don't know, and their executive director, Gigi Lee, filed a defamation lawsuit accusing the RCMP of not properly investigating before publicly accusing them of hosting illegal police stations on behalf of the People's Republic of China. The centers have been accused of acting as hubs to harass and intimidate members of the Chinese community in Canada, allegations the groups deny. I guess we'll sort it out in court, won't we? Have they intimidated these Chinese expats to such an extent that they won't show up in court if called by the RCMP? I don't know. Could be. I mean, the Chinese are great for intimidating people's families back home. They tried to do it to Michael Chong, Conservative MP. So we'll see. But you can find these Chinese police stations on a map. And I'm old enough to remember when Harper chucked out the Iranian diplomats for doing exactly this out of the Iranian embassy. Intimidating expats, threatening their families back home if the expats didn't shut up. And so these guys with the Chinese police stations, they're just doing it a little bit more openly. They're not doing it out of the embassy or the consulates. They're just setting up shop in strip malls and doing it. And then they say stuff like, no, we're providing diplomatic services, like helping Chinese expats renew their driver's license. I'd love to renew. I'd love to know how many driver's licenses were renewed through a Chinese police station in a strip mall in the GTA. All right. So I think now we've touched on everything. We want to give a shout out to Yuta Bursi, who has suffered for many years with my mispronunciation of their name. They are now a monthly supporter of us on Rumble, so we thank you so much for that. And Yuta, besides becoming a monthly supporter, gives us $5 and says, if it were at a mosque, Justin Trudeau would be there as soon as his plane was ready. Yeah, for sure it would. He would be denouncing all of us. Let's just take a second here to talk about Justin Trudeau's Online Harms Act. And I should have talked about it at the time when we were talking about this. He wants to control the internet for hate. We've got hate marches on the street. Start there. If you can't manage mobs of crypto and neo-Nazis, Hitler Youth 2.0, running amok on the streets of, again, Canada's largest and most diverse city, I'm sorry you can't police hurt feelings on the internet. You're just not able to. You shouldn't be able to. But why would you go there when you have tangible hate tangible boots on the ground hate marches on the streets? Police can't do anything, and you're like, you know what, we're going to deal with internet hurt feelings first? Give your head a shake. All right, let's keep going. Another $5. Ableist SL says, one of your rogue associates, Ian Miles Chong, is potentially getting Rebel News sued by the quartering by slandering him as a pedophile by using clearly worthless evidence where he said nothing wrong. Ian Miles Chong is a freelancer with Rebel News, and I don't get involved in anybody's internet back and forth on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. Flame wars are an entire waste of your time. It took me way too long to learn that, by the way. But my advice to everybody on the internet, everybody, is to punch upward. the internet, particularly Twitter, now that we have gone on our great lawsuit escapade, getting all the Liberal cabinet ministers to block people, now's your time to make sure that they listen to you. Punch up. Have your say there. It's the internet town square, and the politicians are standing right in the middle of it. Go yell at them. That's my advice to everybody on the internet. And I should note, our friend Dave notes that Gigi Lee is also a city councillor. So this city councillor, representative of the Chinese police stations, wow, is suing the RCMP. What a complete perfect circle of progressive nonsense right there. But it also shows you how infiltrated, possibly, allegedly, don't sue me, Gigi Lee, Canadian politics are. We know that the Chinese government is credibly accused of intervening on behalf of the Trudeau Liberals in an election they were slated to win anyway in 2021, and flipped some seats in favor of the Liberals, including that of Alice Wong and Kenny Chiu in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia, which is funny because Justin Trudeau then called criticism of Chinese meddling racist, and we're like, I'm pretty sure Kenny Chiu's Chinese. he got screwed. So anyway, it just goes to show just how completely colonized, potentially, allegedly, all levels of Canadian politics are by the CCP. I think that's it. Are those all of our chats? Okay, perfect, Olivia. Thanks for bearing with me while I'm in the studio. It's odd because I'm used to sitting in my little office with my dog under my desk, ranting alone to a camera, but there are other people around and things around, and it's nice to be in this new studio. I only ever get to see it the same way you do on the other side of a screen. Thanks, Olivia, for putting the show together. Thanks to everybody who works behind the scenes to make sure the show is there and ready for you to click when you want to watch it. Thank you to everybody who pitched in a little bit to keep the lights on here at Rebel News. We are grateful for it because, as you know, Justin Trudeau is leaving less of your money in your pocket than ever before. So we're just grateful that you choose us. And thanks to everybody else who watches, shows, comments, shares, just generally supports the work that we do here at Rebel News, helps us get around the internet censorship and the metering of our work. And as my friend David Menzies always says, stay sane.
Prime Minister Trudeau, will you be restoring funding to UNRWA?
The ongoing humanitarian crisis and disaster in Gaza is heart-wrenching for everyone. We know how important it is to get aid into Gaza to help families, the innocents, the civilians, the people who have been devastated by the past 2 months, facing starvation, facing instability and uncertainty. We know we need to continue to be there for them. At the same time, there are serious allegations being followed up by the United Nations, and we're going to continue to move thoughtfully forward, but our priority will always be being there to protect innocent lives.
Hi, Prime Minister. Just to clarify, since you mentioned before moving forward thoughtfully on UNRWA, can you confirm yes or no whether funding will be resumed to the organization? And if so, what has changed since last month when your government announced a pause on that funding?
We have ministers right now in the Middle East engaging on the ground with partners, looking at all the things that Canada can do and should do. We've been talking about airlifts lately. We need to get more aid into Gaza. We all recognize that. We're not making any announcements today, but we will continue to make sure Canada does the right thing in this situation and puts the protection of civilian life at the forefront of everything we do.
Follow-up? Given Israel has accused UNRWA of having a dozen employees who participated in the October 7th attacks, would any future funding from Canada to the organization be tied to conditions or reform?
When we began our investments in UNRWA after a previous government had suspended them, we put in significant conditions and assurances about where and how that funding was